In the heart of Canada's urban landscapes, towering buildings that were once symbols of modernity are beginning to show the signs of severe deterioration. The 1,990 seconds were a time of rapid construction, with developers rushing to meet the demand for housing in the wake of a booming economy. But today, those same buildings are turning dangerous, and the cracks are beginning to show literally. In cities like Vancouver, Toronto, and Calgary, structures that were supposed to stand for decades are now facing unexpected and catastrophic failures, some of them overnight. Over the past year, the number of 1,990 seconds buildings undergoing emergency repairs has skyrocketed. What was once a period of optimism has now turned into a potential housing crisis. The fact that these buildings were constructed with the most up-to-date technologies of the time, using materials that were considered innovative, seems almost irrelevant now, as their designs and construction methods are rapidly proving to be inadequate for the demands of modern living. The real question is, how many more of these aging towers are at risk? What will the repercussions be for the residents, the city, and the real estate market as a whole? It's not just the buildings themselves that are falling apart, so too are the systems meant to protect them. In Vancouver alone, reports from CMHC indicate that there has been a 30% increase in the number of buildings in urgent need of major structural repairs. More alarming is the number of unoccupied condos that have been condemned, unable to meet basic safety standards due to faulty plumbing, electrical systems, and deteriorating foundations. In fact, several condos in the downtown core have been deemed uninhabitable, even though they were constructed less than 30 years ago. The failures are coming fast and hard. Just last month, a high-rise in Vancouver's Yaletown district was evacuated after a significant water leak caused by a burst pipe damaged crucial electrical systems, creating a major fire hazard. The building had only been constructed in the mid-1990 seconds, and yet its systems were completely inadequate to cope with modern demands. Residents were forced to relocate temporarily, and emergency repairs are estimated to cost upwards of $5 million. And this is just one example of what's happening across the country. In Toronto, a similar situation is unfolding. A 1,990 seconds office tower in the financial district had a partial collapse of its upper floors due to structural issues that had gone unnoticed until they became critical. The damage was so extensive that portions of the building had to be cordoned off for safety. What is most shocking is that the building had recently undergone a renovation, and no major faults were detected by the contractors. This raises the question, if these buildings are failing so soon, what happens when the same issues are found in thousands of other towers built around the same time? The consequences of this structural degradation are not just financial. The human cost is starting to mount. Residents who were living in these towers have already begun to feel the effects of the crisis. Some families have been forced to leave their homes with little to no notice, as buildings are deemed unsafe. For those who were renters, the situation is even worse. They find themselves displaced and forced to compete for limited rental housing options in a market already stretched thin. For homeowners, the situation is equally dire. Many of these aging buildings have seen their property values plummet as they've been labeled as high risk. A report from RBC suggests that the average value of a condo in Vancouver has dropped by as much as 25% in the Matip last 6 months alone, primarily due to the risk posed by these aging towers. As developers and property owners scramble to cover the costs of repairs, they are finding it harder and harder to secure financing for such massive undertakings. With mortgage rates on the rise and no real plan in place to fix the situation, homeowners in these buildings face the terrifying prospect of losing everything they've invested in. The chaos caused by these failures is not just limited to the residents. Developers who built these towers in the 1,990 seconds are now finding themselves on the brink of bankruptcy. With the costs of repairs ballooning, many of the same companies responsible for constructing these buildings are now unable to cover the expenses needed to bring them up to code. Banks, in turn, are pulling back from financing real estate projects in general, fearing that investing in aging properties is too risky. As a result, construction has slowed to a crawl, and new projects are being delayed or outright canceled. The collapse of these towers also reveals a deeper, systemic failure. For years, building codes and regulations have failed to keep pace with the challenges posed by aging infrastructure. What's more, there has been little incentive for developers to maintain the buildings they've constructed, as the focus has been on new, high-end developments instead. Now, as the structures of the 1,990 seconds begin to fail, the government is scrambling to figure out what to do. The city of Vancouver, for instance, has proposed a $1.5 billion emergency fund to help with repairs, but even that amount seems insufficient given the scale of the problem. The lack of proper maintenance and oversight has led to a perfect storm of issues: rising construction costs, supply chain breakdowns, and rising interest rates that make financing repairs nearly impossible. Many residents are finding themselves caught between a rock and a hard place. They can't afford to leave their homes, but they also can't afford to stay in buildings that are actively crumbling around them. This crisis isn't just about a few buildings here and there. It's about the future of the entire housing market in Canada. As more buildings from the 1,990 seconds and early 2000s begin to show signs of serious wear and tear, the risk of widespread failure grows. If more buildings in Vancouver, Toronto, and other major cities are found to be structurally unsound, the ripple effects on the housing market could be catastrophic. With the average cost of repairs for a single building now exceeding $10 million, the total cost of addressing this crisis could reach into the billions of dollars. And while the government's response so far has been focused on temporary measures, such as emergency repairs and funding for relocations, there is little sign of a long-term solution. Many experts fear that the government will continue to focus on short-term fixes, leaving the root causes of the problem, poor construction practices, outdated codes, and a lack of long-term investment in infrastructure unaddressed. The question now is whether the country can prevent this crisis from spiraling out of control. With the housing market already in a fragile state, the last thing Canada needs is a wave of building failures that could send property values into a freefall. And yet, that's exactly what we're staring down. If the necessary repairs aren't made soon, the real threat of a housing collapse looms larger than ever before. More buildings could be evacuated, more lives could be disrupted, and the cost to repair this damage may prove to be too much for the country to bear. This is a situation that's unfolding right before our eyes, and we're only beginning to see the full extent of the damage. The question is, will we act in time to prevent a complete collapse, or will Canada's aging towers be the undoing of an entire generation of homeowners and residents? Stay tuned for Part 2, where we'll dive deeper into the potential consequences of this crisis and explore what might happen if these buildings continue to fail. As the crisis continues to unfold, there's a growing sense of unease among residents, developers, and government officials alike. The situation has escalated from a few isolated incidents to a nationwide concern, with the threat of more building failures becoming an ever-present reality. Across Canada, the news has spread residents are anxious, developers are scrambling, and the government seems paralyzed, unsure of how to respond to the scale of the issue. But as time passes, the cost of inaction grows higher, and the consequences of this crisis become more severe. In cities like Vancouver and Toronto, residents of 1,990 seconds towers are already dealing with the immediate fallout. Families have been displaced, unable to return to their homes as extensive repairs are required. Some have been living in temporary housing for months, while others are caught in limbo, unsure of whether their homes will ever be safe again. These aren't just buildings, they're people's lives, their homes, and their futures. The emotional toll of this crisis cannot be overstated. For many homeowners, the financial pain is already palpable. The drop in property values is one of the most visible effects of this crisis. Condos that were once worth over $1 million in Vancouver's downtown core are now worth a fraction of that, as more and more buyers are turned off by the risks associated with aging towers. The real estate market, which had been riding high for years, has suddenly come to a screeching halt. Potential buyers are staying away, unsure of what they're getting into. Investors, once eager to capitalize on Canada's booming housing market, are now wary, fearing that their investments could go the way of these crumbling buildings. For those who were looking to sell, the market has become a nightmare. Sellers are forced to lower their prices drastically in order to make their properties appealing. And even then, there are no guarantees. With so many buildings in disrepair, prospective buyers are opting to wait, hoping for a market rebound that may never come. As a result, those who own properties in these aging towers are stuck. They can't sell, they can't afford the necessary repairs, and they're left watching as their investments wither away. The financial strain is also hitting developers hard. Many of the companies responsible for constructing these towers in the 1,990 seconds are now facing bankruptcy. unable to afford the repairs necessary to restore their buildings to a safe condition. With construction material costs skyrocketing due to global supply chain disruptions, many developers are finding it increasingly difficult to get the financing needed for large-scale repair projects. Some have already defaulted on their loans, unable to meet their obligations to creditors. The ripple effect has been felt across the real estate sector, with banks pulling back from the industry altogether, fearing that future investments will be too risky. The scale of this crisis is unprecedented, and the damage is only beginning to show. If the government doesn't step in with a comprehensive plan to address the issue, the consequences could be catastrophic. The economic toll of this crisis could reach billions of dollars, as the cost of repairs and potential legal liabilities add up. More and more buildings will need to be evacuated, and the public trust in Canada's housing market will be severely shaken. But even as the crisis deepens, there are signs that the government may be starting to take action, though whether it will be enough is still unclear. Some cities, like Vancouver, have announced emergency funds to help with repairs, but these funds are only a drop in the ocean compared to what's needed to address the widespread failures. Vancouver's proposal of a $1.5 billion emergency fund is a start, but experts agree that the true cost of repairs could exceed $10 billion if the situation continues to escalate. And with the housing market already under strain, it's hard to see where this money will come from without further compromising public services or adding to the national debt. Meanwhile, the federal government has yet to put forward any concrete plans to address the root causes of the issue. Critics argue that Canada's building codes have failed to keep up with the rapid pace of development, and that developers have been allowed to cut corners in the name of profits. It's clear that the system, as it currently stands, is unsustainable. The country's aging infrastructure is in desperate need of investment, and the government must act quickly to prevent further harm. The situation is made all the more complex by the political contradictions at play. On one hand, developers are clamoring for government support to help fund repairs and keep their projects alive. On the other hand, environmental and housing advocates are calling for stricter regulations to ensure that future developments are built to last. The conflict between these competing interests has left the government in a difficult position, with little room to maneuver. The public is watching closely, demanding answers and a clear plan of action. As the situation worsens, the human cost of this crisis is becoming more apparent. Families who have lived in these buildings for decades are now facing the possibility of losing everything they've worked for. The stress is overwhelming. Many are unsure where they will go if their homes are deemed uninhabitable, and others are already facing the financial strain of relocating or paying for expensive repairs. For some, the emotional toll has been even greater. For many, these towers were more than just buildings, they were homes, a symbol of stability and security. Now, that security has been ripped away, leaving many feeling vulnerable and uncertain about their futures. This crisis is far from over. In fact, it's likely to get worse before it gets better. With the number of buildings at risk continuing to rise, Canada is on the brink of a real estate disaster that could fundamentally reshape the housing market for years to come. The government's response, while a step in the right direction, has so far been insufficient to meet the scale of the problem. And with the costs of repairs skyrocketing, it's unclear whether developers and property owners will be able to shoulder the financial burden on their own. The real threat, however, lies in the long-term implications of this crisis. If more buildings fail, if more residents are displaced, if more developers go bankrupt, the ripple effect will be felt across the entire economy. Housing is one of the country's most important industries, and a collapse in the housing market could send shockwaves throughout the economy, causing widespread unemployment, a downturn in consumer spending, and a decline in the quality of life for Canadians across the country. It's a threat that could impact everyone, regardless of where they live. As the crisis unfolds, it's clear that Canada's housing market is at a crossroads. Will the government step up to protect its citizens and secure the future of the housing sector, or will the country continue down this perilous path toward collapse? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: this crisis is far from over, and it will take years to rebuild what has been lost. As we look to the future, one thing is clear: Canada's housing system needs a complete overhaul. The government must act swiftly and decisively, implementing comprehensive reforms to prevent further damage. Whether this crisis will result in lasting change or simply be swept under the rug remains to be seen, but the stakes are higher than ever before. So, what do you think? Can Canada weather this storm, or is it too late? Leave a comment below with your thoughts, And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on this ongoing crisis. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.